So Lexington, Kentucky, known as the horse capital of the world. And if we zoom into the state of Kentucky, you can see Lexington right here. Not far away from a lot of the other metropolises we have looked at here on this channel. And the population demographics here in the modern day, just over 300,000. If we go back to the turn of the 20th century, we're looking at a small city of 26,000 people. And I want you to remember as we go through these photographs and postcards that most of these buildings will be said to have been built in this time period here. So the city of Lexington gets its name in 1775. That would be 17 years before Kentucky actually becomes a state. And history tells us that the city gets its name from the Battle of Lexington, battles of Lexington and Concord. So as an homage, I suppose, to the victory there. But as you know, if you're familiar with my channel, this is not intended to be a history lesson. This is us thumbing our nose at the history as it pertains to the infrastructure and architecture that we are seeing with our eyes, and the story that history gives us about how these all came to be and when they came to be. And we have a wonderful looking racehorse track. And we get those street scenes, the scattered wagons. You'll see several as we go through this slide. The wagons all sort of look like sort of out of place when you look at the architecture, the grandeur of the architecture. So there's a real disconnect if you've looked at anything in this field of research between what we're seeing in these photographs and what we're told about history. We have a more organic impression of how everything came to be as far as what we have been taught. We don't really envision these multi-storied structures having existed back in the mid to late 1800s. And in fact, they'll tell us that so many of these were all constructed in that late 1880s in through to the turn of the century. When really, when you look at a lot of these photographs, they look a lot older, and they certainly don't look like they were made for the purpose of whatever you see on the signage on some of these. It's actually almost covering up the building with all the signage here. And we have several post-secondary institutions in Lexington. Oh, we'll get to that near the end of the file. We take a little bit of a closer look at the architecture, though. Again, the juxtaposition is glaringly obvious, really. These buildings, even back then in the horse and buggy era, these look like they've been around for a long time. They have a timeless quality to them, and they certainly don't fit the narrative of the gentleman we're seeing here. Always seems to be some sort of almost like a villainous air to some of the characters that we see in many of these photographs. Everything covered up, sort of inconspicuous, face covered. So you get that aspect of the in the old photographs, and then you also get sort of the chaotic element, right? And you can see it here as well. We have the streetcar, like every other town we've looked at had streetcars set up, even though we were told that the streetcars were only around for a short period of time. They just happened to be everywhere. So it's like we have to assume that every community that existed was Johnny on the spot with this new technology that was going to be implemented. You see how muddy the roads look here? Almost looks like they've pulled the bricks or something like that from the brick pavers from the roads here. That's just me speculating, of course. And I think a big problem too is just the weight of the architecture itself, the lack of means we were told they had to construct. For instance, you can see how heavy the upper reaches of this structure are. And all of these materials would be very heavy concrete stone type of materials. So it really adds to the difficulty of the build, the costing of the build, and just the ability to achieve the end goal. And I always talk about that, the need for all these skilled hands, and not just in the bricklaying department or stone cutting department, but in all departments of a build, you need everybody knowing their stuff to accomplish these tasks. And they've got some interesting formations in the surrounding area. That doesn't look all that natural, does it? And I want you to remember as we go through these, the population demographics at the time, right? About 20,000 people at the turn of the century. Was used the turn of the century as a good benchmark to give us an idea of what was really going on as far as population density, what type of development could really have been taking place at that time. And of course, you have to remember you've got supposedly populations with multiple children, and you've got half the population are women. So how many people were really available to do this construction? They also have them looking quite old, even by the mid 20th century. Like not looking 60 years old, more so looking over 100 years old, even at that point, or more so. All right. As usual, we get a insane asylum as part of the narrative in many of these locations. And again, I've talked a lot about why the need to contain the insane in the 1800s with these massive structures. Eastern Kentucky Lunatic Asylum. Also suggesting that society was so organized at the time that they were able to construct these and fill them and staff them with the experts. We have to think about how far-fetched this really is according to the narrative that we've been told. I think our true history is a far cry from what we have been taught. We have been diminished. Our true history has been diminished. I think through this research we are piecing together a picture of a population that was systematically erased, where the orphans were taken in with all sorts of, whether you want to call them epidemics, such as the cholera epidemics here, with the wars, with a lot of displacement and disaster. But for some reason, all of these orphans became available and had to be educated through the system. And you have that system, that process repeating itself down through several generations. It's almost like a sifting that was going on. I had to dig pretty hard for this one. This is the Oddfellows Orphans Home in Lexington. And very difficult to find this one, which I thought was interesting. But again, you have the massive structures, and there's evidence again that this is going on. You have the asylums and the orphans' homes. So the narrative repeats itself. The usual suspects are involved. It doesn't seem to matter where you look. So we have to make a decision when we see this narrative continue to repeat itself. We turn a blind eye because we don't like the implications. We fall for the conventional narrative that tells us that this is a benevolent organization that was looking to better society, and that there were all of these orphans as a result of a natural process, and that they weren't trying to indoctrinate, they were honestly trying to educate and lift up their fellow man, I suppose you could say. Or you come to the third option, where you actually face the possibility of what you're looking at is a reseeding of the human population through these organizations, and an elimination of anyone that should question the narrative. I found this as well, the only real evidence I could find of a Masonic temple. That and the Odd Fellows, of course. And as we go through this slideshow, you are seeing also the a similar framework of structures. You have a brewery here, and you've seen these types of breweries before. It makes me wonder, we're looking at repurposed buildings, buildings that served a different purpose once upon a time that are being used, or was there basically a like an old world that was a new world was overlaid over top of the old world, and there's a framework already in place that was just hijacked by the ruling elite, whatever you want to call them, the inheritors, a cabal, whatever you want to call them. Were the riches of this world just hijacked, and the wrong people put in charge? I guess you could say. I found it interesting, even the bus depot, Greyhound bus terminal, looking like a beautiful Greco-Roman style structure in the front there. Even the entrance to the cemetery is quite spectacular. I always really loved these gable-style roofs that go into a cone, turn into a cone at the end. Very, very difficult to accomplish and very catching to the eye. This is the central church, and there's a modern-day look at the front entry area of that one. So some very familiar-looking architectural styling going on there, and very, of course, difficult to accomplish. And when you look at, again, the width of the roads or streets and the styling of the buildings, the multi-storied aspect at an early time period, it's obvious to me looking at that something doesn't make sense. And all of this looking like it's been around for quite some time. But history will tell us that this is all very, very new and recent at the time this photograph is taken. The old City Hall, or they call it the new City Hall, of course. Looking like it was so frivolous to be putting columns on all these structures. The grand entry and the columns, like that's no small task. This was something that was done even at the bus stations, like I mentioned. It makes me think of the Pete Seeger song on the little boxes. Everything now seems to be little boxes made of ticky-tacky. And so this is predating the ticky-tacky. Alright, this is the courthouse. And really a classic old worlder. Looking massive compared to the goings on down here. You just imagine trying to assemble this and having the central dome tower stand beyond the roof ridge line here. It's quite incredible. Structurally, it's quite a feat. Aesthetically, it's fantastic. I have heard some people in the research community talking about how the bell and the dome worked in conjunction. So when you're seeing this type of element to the buildings, there was a resonance going on, and the domes worked to amplify the resonance of the bells. The hustling and bustling small city of Lexington at the turn of the century. A county court day, looking like it could easily be 500-year-old city in this drawing. But it's not. It's all fairly recent, all of this architecture. Or so we're told. Very difficult to duplicate, very difficult to fix. Looks like we've got the single 4 lines rather than the IV for the Roman numeral. Seen that quite a bit in our research. And looks like we've got a lot of copper styling going on at the top as well. And the upper interior area, in case you thought it was nothing to shake a stick at. Completely finished. Absolutely incredible. Definitely old world. You've got a very old statue up front here. So, did the inheritors graft over the concept I was mentioning earlier, grafting over the old reality, the old structure, and put a new spin on it with the re-education that was going on and the repopulation that was going on, just putting a new spin on what was familiar. Something to think about. Here's the previous courthouse, apparently, that burned down in 1897. A likely story we always hear of the stone structures burning to the ground. But we'll move on and look at a few more familiar structures. Again, the columns. You're seeing this a lot here in Lexington, this style. Something that really is not duplicated in our modern day, but a part of the old style. There's a good look at the brick pavers in the streets. The brick pavers looking very old. This would be that central square. Not sure this building, but it gives you a real sense of the ornate styling, especially on the front here of the double column, double balcony. Also got some sort of winged beast up here. I don't think it's an eagle. I'm not sure. What do you think that is? Could that be some sort of griffin type creature? I'm not sure. And if you're hearing all sorts of background noises, I'm not sure if you are. That is just the kids having fun on the weekend as they are away from school. I've also got the cat and the dog having it out. They seem to like to join me when I'm making my videos. Trying to get on there, I guess. Alright, this is the Federal Building, often also called Post Office, Federal Building and Post Office. Interesting sign we've got here. Child's Brothers Drugs, prescriptions. Massive sign takes up the entire side of the building. So, inheritor sign, old world architecture. That's what I think. There it is again. And of course you have mysterious cloaked figures everywhere. This is a funeral home at the time, having some of that tech. You have the Ridgeline tech going on. Speculated that a lot of this having to do with the harnessing of energy, and then the structures themselves being a part of this energy harnessing process, whether they're resonators or batteries, storage devices, whatever it may be. Hampton Court, I did see a short video on the Hampton Court area. They're saying this was developed in the early 1900s. Now, the Hampton Court, if you're not familiar, there is one over in the UK. I've actually been there. Henry the VIII's, I think. Henry the VIII's manor. But this has nothing to do with that. It did confuse me when I was doing the research on it. This is the entrance to the Hampton Court. I find it interesting how textured the stone here is. Maybe you get a better look at it here. This is a still from the video I was talking about. Look how old this looks. Doesn't look like it's 100 years old. But what's interesting is in that video they mention how this land, they had to demolish an orphan's asylum to make way for the Hampton Court in behind there. And I don't know if they're trying to say it's that same orphan's asylum as the Oddfellows one I showed earlier. But I looked and looked and looked and I could find no other trace of any other orphan's asylum. So I think that's an interesting part of the narrative. I'll link that video in the description below. Here we have again that column in the upper tech. We're seeing all the hallmarks of the old world. This is some of the interior for that structure. All old world, I would suggest. Quite spectacular. And this is just their newspaper building, the Herald, the Lexington Herald. Alright, we'll keep moving forward again. Those columns, again, you're seeing this everywhere, everywhere. The Henry Clay High School. Henry Clay looks like he's a Kentucky-born lawyer and a politician. Served in the Senate and the House of Representatives. There's your timeline there. And of course he was important enough for them to build these types of structures in his name. The Hotel Lafayette still stands, looking fairly run down, I'd say, in the modern day. But you still get some of the detailing that we're expecting here. We have the griffins facing each other here as a part of the exterior facade of the structure. We have a jail looking like an old medieval castle. And there's another look at it. Just the texture alone of the stonework there is screaming at you that something is not right with the narrative. Alright, we have an old female college from 1871. This is from. So this having been around for quite some time before that, obviously. The public library. Notice there are so many with that same look, as I mentioned earlier. And there's just a taste of what they look like in the modern day. Also suggests the grandeur of the building and the lettering don't match. It's looking very simplistic for the decoration that we're seeing. The old market hall. Not a bad looking structure. Makes me wonder how many of these buildings that we see that are just rectangular boxes were scaled back, where these types of effects were removed. It's worth considering. This is the Northern Bank. We've seen this a few times now. And again, a structure that screams at me old world. This is from a different time. And something we don't really have any memory of. I think this is and getting passed down as a bank. Of course, you get these schools as well, having that similar feel, look and feel, that multi-storied aspect with the old bell tower. And the old high schools in Lexington even had their columns, apparently. No shortage of any of that. This is an old Baptist church, I believe. Unfortunately, the top is cut off. You can see the brickwork, the ornate detailing of the brickwork here, though. And the early narrative, of course, that was with the streetcars was that they were pulled by horses. And you have that going on here as well. They did once have an opera house in Lexington, because they really appreciated their opera in the 1800s, so much so that even small cities across the continent had their own opera houses. And all of those cities, including Lexington here, had the capacity and the know-how to ornately detail and decorate the interiors. Beautiful opera house. Apologies for that one. And more geology in the surrounding areas that I find suspicious. And if you've gotten into the meltology aspect or the post-cataclysm realm concept, it really makes you wonder about what you're seeing when you find some of these strange formations. So a lot of it's starting to look like post-cataclysm structure, or what remains of that. Several schools here. The importance of an education in the 1800s does not escape the folks of Lexington, Kentucky. This is the Sayre Female School. Makes you wonder about if there was any breeding programs going on. I know it's a dark thought, but with all the orphans and everything that went on, there's much to uncover about the 1800s. This is a good illustration of an old world building being repurposed with painted on the side for whatever they're selling: beers, sodas, candies, cigars, Walker's Confectionery. Come on, ice cream. Look at the structure itself. Look at the brickwork. It's sort of all been blended into the background, but it's still there for you to see. The soldiers' home. And there you have the soldiers out front. Are a lot of these orphans? You ever wonder? How many orphans had orphans of their own? Went off to war and had orphans of their own? How many times over did it happen before they could really get a stranglehold of the narrative? It's definitely worth considering. And of course you have several train stations, and of course the Lexington train station had to have its columns in the entryway. Grandeur of the entryway itself. Transylvania University. This is an older structure. You can see here, this is where their medical hall had the columns, of course, again. Built in 1839, burned in 1863. Very early part of the narrative, but they're still depicting the same type of buildings we're seeing here. You also have a lower level. It's all interesting. All indications of the old world, and that the historical timeline that is given to us is not a natural progression, and in fact, the truth has been obscured, and purposes of buildings have been changed, and there's much more to this story than we have been told. And that's why I do these videos here on this channel. I like to do them by location for the most part, in an attempt maybe to appeal to people of different regions. But at the same time, it's a way to catalog what I'm finding and to illustrate the fact that this evidence is everywhere, and that there's something wrong with the entire narrative. This is a Carnegie Library. And the last structure that we're going to be looking at is this public health farm. And apparently constructed for treating drug addiction. They call it the narcotics farm, or public health narcotics farm. We're told this thing goes up in the 30s, interestingly enough. That makes you wonder. Are you seeing a lot of the that overlap with the Art Deco styling and then the old world styling as well? Either way, it's quite clear that this is a massive undertaking. They opened it in 35, we're told. They announced the construction of it in 30, so I don't know, some sort of miraculous construction project. But interesting nonetheless. This has been a look at Lexington, Kentucky. I hope you have enjoyed this, and if you have any locations for me to look at, put them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. This has been an old world exploration. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and comment. I believe we are in the process of remembering who we really are and casting off the shackles of illusion. Until next time.